our next presentation here, which is to give you an overview of Blue Mountain RAM R4 and the best practices configuration. So we have Randy Perrotta, who is the Director of Product Development, and Scott Fry, who's the Director of Project and Customer Management at Blue Mountain. So welcome both Randy and Scott, and you should have all the control to move through the slides.
All right, thanks, Drexel. So Scott and I are going to tag team this presentation, and just to introduce myself again, I'm Randy Perrotta. I am the Director of Product Development here at Blue Mountain. I've been here over 20 years. Have seen the evolution of from the Cowman days, Cowman 2 and 3, up to Cowman 4 and the initial RAM implementations, and then to what we're going to be talking about here. So Scott, you want to take a minute and just introduce yourself first, please?
Sure. My name is Scott Fry. I'm the Director of Project and Customer Management here at Blue Mountain. I have been with Blue Mountain for 17 years. I've got to meet most of you, and definitely lots of new people at the summit this year. So looking forward to catching up with you guys in the social part of the event.
Great. Thanks, Scott. So here's the agenda for our talk today. And as I said, Scott and I are going to bounce back and forth here a little bit. I'll talk about the overview and the platform, and then Scott will talk about the configuration, and I'll touch on the roadmap piece. And then Scott will introduce what the topics are for tomorrow's sessions. So before we do, though, at Blue Mountain, we're super excited about R4. I mean, we've been living and breathing this thing for a number of years now, and we're right on the cusp of kind of releasing this to the public, and Keith will be talking more about that tomorrow. But I did want to reassure our R3 customers about a few things. Now, all of you are R3 customers, or maybe some of you are still using R2. We certainly believe your future is around R4. And we think after you see some of the demonstrations today and the discussions today, you're going to agree with us and you're going to want to move to R4. But we also know that this is the life science industries, and just because you want to do things, sometimes you're a little slower to be able to move. Sometimes things get in your way, and we understand that. That's not a problem. We're here just to assure you that R3 is a viable, stable product. We continue to maintain it. We continue to deploy it. If you have additional sites you want to bring on that platform, we'll be happy to do that for you. We'll continue to support it, and we'll continue to supply updates to it as it's needed. But make no mistake, we believe R4 is your future, and at some point you're going to transition over to that. So I wanted to review a few things. So some of you have come to our summits in the past, may have heard some of these messages, but I do think it's important. We have roughly 250 people that could be attending today, and our ideas for both R3 and R4 essentially come from you, our customers. Now they come.
Hey, Rudy.
From you,
Good. What's up?
a variety of ways.
Yeah, I'm on a webinar right.
They come to you a variety of ways, either through our sales activities, or when we're doing the implementation with you, you're talking with our BPAs or our SIAs or the project managers, or when you're calling into technical support. We're recording these things, and what we have internally is a feature request system, and those things get evaluated. And ultimately, they've led to what R3 has become in many ways. And in other ways, they've certainly influenced us in things that we couldn't necessarily do in R3, but they were things that we knew we needed to take care of in R4. And so these topics that you see up here are generally how we categorize these things. We'll tag them with things like automation. And automation is this idea that essentially takes much of the responsibility off of the user. In other words, the user goes out and does his job, fills in the data as necessary, and the system reacts to it. And if a notification needs to go out or a new record needs to get generated, that's happening through automation actions. And so we categorize some things as automation. Compliance, of course, are those things that are essentially around the FDA, whether that be the audit trail or electronic signatures or data integrity, items like that. The enterprise area, of course, are those things that are specific to those multi-site facilities. It may have manufacturing in more than one place in the country or within the world. And often they need things that some of our smaller companies don't need. But at the same time, we also recognize that a lot of our smaller companies ultimately acquire other businesses and eventually become small enterprises themselves. And then the last two are really around the system itself. So performance, as you can imagine, that's just really around the speed at which certain things happen, whether they're batch operations or just the interaction with you in the software. And usability is a similar thing, just things that make things more convenient, essentially reducing the number of clicks or operations that you have to do to execute some things. And, you know, all I really want to do is encourage you to continue to supply us with those ideas. Just because you put one in the box doesn't necessarily mean we're going to act on it. But generally, what we're trying to do is gather those ideas and hopefully hear from more than one customer that these things are important. We don't want to design features in the software that are specific to an individual's needs. We're really trying to put things into the software that have broad appeal, that our larger customer base can take advantage of. So again, work through your sales team, work through your implementation team, work through your project managers, work through our technical support team. We like those ideas to continue coming in. Drexel, I can't get to the next slide. If you could move me along, Drexel, I'd appreciate that.
Sure. You know, Randy, it will not let me advance here. Let me just try this one more time.
If you just want to click through for me, that'd be fine as well.
Certainly, it will not let me click through. So let me just see what I can do. It's just once I share the Zoom link, it's like it doesn't want to move. That is certainly odd. Let's try this one more time here. So sorry about the technical issue. Well, there's your next slide for a second here, Randy.
That's great. I could talk to that. That's fine. Thank you, Drexel.
Yep.
So I just want to talk a little bit about how R4 came about. And it's been in the works for quite a while here. You know, when we first conceived of R4, we understood some of our weaknesses in R3, right? The technology was from the 2006 era, which was great, still stable, still runs well, but it was nothing that we wanted to build our next generation platform on. So we wanted to make sure that we introduced new technologies there. And we knew that there were certain limitations in R3 that couldn't easily be rectified with code changes. In other words, it would have taken a significant rewrite of some underlying software, which introduces great risk into what is, for you, a validated application. It just didn't make sense for us to take those kinds of risks. And we also knew that there were some more things that we could do for our enterprise customers. You can imagine a facility with 20 or 30 sites and trying to make a configuration change and then having to go through each of those sites individually and get it right 20 times or 25 times. Not ideal. And so that was the original mantra, really what we were driving for in R4. But a couple of interesting things happened in the last few years that we recognized. One was that our R3 cloud hosting was getting widely adopted by our customer base. It's absolutely amazing. I mean, if you look at what our implementations are today, probably 90 to 95% of them are cloud solutions for our customers, and exceptions tend to be those add-on additions to our existing sites. And then the other item that came into play was the adoption of the best practices template, and using that, our customers use that either out of the box as it was delivered or as the starting point for what we wanted to do. And so with those two additional pieces of information, we went back into our R4 designs and tweaked things so that we could definitely leverage that knowledge as we went through. When we talk about the cloud, I just wanted to talk about R3 here a little bit and share with you some of the things that we learned along the way. We happen to use R3 internally to manage all of our cloud customers who are running RAM in the cloud. So we track every deployment. Our project managers or our implementation team, they're issuing work requests that our cloud team would then go through. Those can be as simple as, hey, we're ready to deploy a new instance, or work with our customer to get their security set up or their login set up, or to add additional users to the system. But we have roughly 100 work plan templates in R3 that we use to manage the work activities that we do for you to kind of keep things going. And what we learned is this is really very efficient in handling things. The system is always available for us. Its systems are always available for you as well. And in our use of the application, it also showed us where some of those weaknesses were. And we took that into consideration as well. Ultimately, it influenced where we ended up in the R4 development cycle. As I mentioned, the technology for RAM came about in the mid 2000s, and R3 will have a life of 15 to 20 years. There's no doubt about that. I mean, the technology was rock solid, but overall technologies do change, and it didn't make sense for us to try to continue with the next generation of this platform on those similar things. So at that point, we knew that we wanted to move along. One of the other things that became apparent to us is this idea of harmonization across facilities. That was a change for us. When we came from the early calibration manager days, CalMan 3, and even into CalMan 4, that isn't what happened. Oftentimes, sites wanted to be silos. They wanted to be independent and not work like others in their facility. And that changed dramatically. And even over the last several years, almost all of our customers are trying to harmonize over many sites when they can. And it makes sense. It's easy to display or demonstrate control over your processes. So we get that. Can you go to the next slide, Drexel? All right, thank you. So when we put together R4, we had some design goals. And the first one was really around enterprise ready, right? And it means that we wanted to be a good partner with our larger companies as well as our smaller companies. And you have those larger companies, those enterprise companies tend to have very unique needs. And I touched on one of those, which was around harmonization and configuration itself. And as a result, R4 introduced a new topic for us, which we refer to as configuration sets. So these things are meant to govern many of your deployments. So if you have many sites that are similar in nature and you want to share behaviors amongst those sites, that you can all operate under a single configuration set. And a configuration set, it includes things like it'll define all the different record types that you can collect information on, so that the different types of assets that you may have. Examples would be just instrumentation or equipment or systems or loops or even locations, as well as the different types of events that you may have, whether that's calibration, maintenance, validation, and also work activities. Again, maintenance, validation, calibration activities, or any of the requests that you may need to generate. We refer to each of those individually as record types, and that you can also identify what is the exact data that I'm allowing our users to collect for a particular record type. So if you had instrumentations, you would define the fields that you want to collect for that. And again, that's defined within a configuration set. And similarly, what are the relationships between those records? How does work request relate to work? Or how does labor get tracked on a work record? All of those relationships are defined within the configuration set itself. When we think about how that data is viewed by the user, the actual forms themselves, what is displayed, those forms are actually configurable by our team. And you can have more than one form to show data to your users that may be pertinent at the time that they're doing a particular activity. In other words, what a manager sees may be different than what a technician needs to see when he's actually performing an activity, or what a quality person needs to see when they're actually reviewing that work. And you can have many forms for each record type, and then through our kind of workflow engine, allow those particular form views to be displayed at the proper time for the proper person. Those workflows also come in sets. So you don't generally have a single workflow to govern the behavior of a system for even a specific record type, like maintenance work. There may be times when you need to be more rigorous with your review process, given what the instrument being maintained actually is, or what it's being used for. And so, again, those things can be defined once and shared amongst all of your sites if you so choose. And then also the notifications themselves. So those things that go out as messages to your user base, they can be defined now once, and then that same notification may need to be referenced by more than one of your workflows. So it may go out and collect information about the asset or the work that's being done. That notification gets set one time, established one time, and gets used by the system as often as necessary. And then lastly, I want to touch on this idea of the configuration sets and the ability to be able to export and import those configuration sets. And this is extremely valuable when we talk about moving from one environment to another. So if you're going from a development environment to a validation environment, or your validation environment to your production environment, you need an easy way just to kind of move those things along. So you go through, you verify everything is okay. You don't want to have to go back through and go through that manual configuration at all times. So we've built things into the system that ultimately will allow us to move your configuration through your environments for you. And again, should simplify things greatly as you go forward. Next slide, Drexel. All right, Cloud Ready. We talked a little bit about R3 and our exposure into the cloud. So R3 was developed as an on-premise implementation. And so when we moved it to the cloud, even though we did some significant cleanup work for it, it still was built a very particular way. And so when we went through and we deployed it in the Azure environment, it was done with virtual machines to host both the application layer and the database layer. And it worked great. Performance is wonderful. Our maintenance of those things is wonderful. The availability of the system is extremely high. Our goal was to achieve 99.5% uptime, and our numbers are way above that. Azure itself is a very rich hosting environment. And interestingly, it continues to get richer over time. But what we learned is that there are things up there that we can take advantage of that we weren't taking advantage of. So in an R4, instead of limiting ourselves to this virtual machine approach, we still use virtual machines in certain locations, but we also use their web apps to host the application layer. We're using web services to do a number of things, as well as their Azure functions, their Azure services and their Azure functions. The beauty of this is that the solutions will continue to scale much better. In our R3 world, we're currently at about, 150 deployments, and we won't have any trouble exceeding, another 100 deployments. But it would be a bit of a management nightmare if we got up to 1,000 deployments. Well, for R4, we don't want to have to deal with those things. And so taking advantage of the environment that Azure provides and some of the services that they provide in there will make this much easier for us as we go along, and ultimately much more reliable for you as well. Next slide, please. So this idea of streamlined implementations, what I want to get across here is that really we talk to our implementation teams, and they've educated us about a number of things, and we listen to that, and we've tried to make things better as we go along, some of which ended up in the application itself to allow easier setup or the ability to configure things that they had difficulty with in the past. Some of those things that were out of the reach of the R3 realm. The other things that we've done is we've learned from, essentially how our FRS was structured and our URSs were structured, and how we generated our IQs and OQs and PQs, and took a hard look at that, and ultimately rewrote those things in a new way to better reflect what's occurring and to better represent what exists inside the system, and ultimately should help speed up the implementation part of the application. So we should be able to take advantage of those things. Next slide, please. All right, and this idea about simplifying the migration effort. Now, it's true that we're looking to bring on new customers, right? So we want a bunch of new customers coming onto the R4 platform, but we also know that we have a lot of R3 customers who are ultimately going to want to get there. And again, there are so many new features that exist inside R4 that we're confident that you're going to want to come and that you're going to want to take advantage of those new features. So you're not going to just want to bring along your old configuration as it is. You're going to want to look at what it was, learn from it, learn what you did well, look at what exists and what's possible in the R4 platform, and take advantage of those things. So to assist in that process, we've developed a tool, a data import tool, alongside of the development activities of R4 itself. And it actually will go in and read the configuration for a customer and generate essentially those import worksheets that are used to bring data inside the system. You're not going to want to bring across all of your legacy data and all that audit trail information, but you are going to want to bring across some of it, right? And we recognize that. But yet, you're still going to need access to that older data. You're still going to need to be able to reference some of that old audit trail information. And so whether you're an on-prem customer and you want to just keep that database running in your systems and leverage your own reports to continue to access that information, that's fine. But if you wanted to move to the cloud, with that data, we'll provide you a mechanisms to report against that system also as we go forward. So it'll provide you the benefit of being able to look back at your R3 information, as well as cleaning up your data and being consistent and only bringing those things necessary that are part of, that will be part of R4. Next slide, please. Okay. So I just wanted to touch on a couple of things here. There isn't a product demonstration in my presentation, but what I wanted the point I wanted to get across to you is that R4 is it is a platform, and it's built of a series of engines. And those engines can be used regardless of the configuration. In other words, they're not hard-coded to a particular aspect of the application. Whether that's the query engine or the automation engine or the notification engine, these engines just exist inside the system and can be used in a number of ways. When you go and you get to witness some of the demonstrations, or if you played some of the videos that we've provided for you, it's clear the first thing you'll get a sense of is the different look and feel of the application. It's dramatic. You know, it's built on current technology, whereas the older R3 version, it definitely had a Windows application feel to it. But we've tried to leverage a number of things here. And what we're displaying here in this graphic is that responsive design that Jim is talking about, that he was talking about earlier. And it's really around this idea that we don't care what device you're using, whether it's your tablet or your phone or your computer, whether it's a laptop or a desktop, the system is going to recognize where it is and it's going to respond. And it's going to respond in a way that lets you use this system. You know, so on your phone, you need to use your fingers quite a bit. And so the system sizes itself to be able to do those things. You know, the search and navigation functionality, right? We introduced this concept of workspaces in the past. Well, we've moved that forward. And the beauty is that those workspaces, again, are generally role-based and can be shared site to site if you so choose, and essentially establish what are your queries or access to your data or your reports or this idea of these integrated charts, which is a relatively new thing here for R4. And so even though we rebuilt the entire query engine, as part of that, what we've built into that query engine is some charting capabilities. And the idea there is to eliminate much of the needs for some of those reports that you were having to write. You can just adjust your queries, return the data, pick a style of chart, and show it. Perhaps it's a pie chart, perhaps it's a bar chart, you know, perhaps it's you know, a number of other ones as well. We support many different charting types. And then ultimately what you will see is a dashboard display where you can have many charts or queries that are going to be available to you. And you can anchor that within a workspace. And again, those workspaces are role-based as you choose to. The other thing I wanted to touch on is some changes we've made to our templates area, both the measurement data templates and the work plan templates. And over the years, we've received different types of data sheets from our customers, and it's clear you're doing different things. And so in this first generation of the application, we've introduced 3 new test types, one of which, or 3 test types, one of which is consistent with the way we've done things in the past. One is a linearity test, one is an eccentricity test, and one is a repeatability test. And not only do those exist, what we've done inside the platform, though, is allow us to add additional test types over time as needed. Similarly, with work plan templates, we have this simple idea of a task list as well as a set of work instructions, as you will. And in the future, if we need to become more granular or more specific, we'll be able to extend that in a number of ways. And that's essentially what this extensibility is getting to. It's not limited to the templates area. It really is extensibility in how you want to use the system. One of the things that we've learned is that we build a system with an idea on how you can use it, and it fits very well with much of what you want to do. But there are unique things that each customer wants to do that may be slightly different, or collect data around a different process or different paper form that you have in here. And those things can be defined as needed and allow you to extend the application. As well as when we talk about the roadmap section here down the road, even some adjacent markets, and we'll touch more on that as we go forward. I did see a question come in chat. Let's see. So Paul's asking a question about a report server and applications like Tableau and Power BI and other KPI applications. Again, that's something that we're looking at. We know that there is a need there. So ultimately, so the short answer is there isn't one yet, but it is an area that we are exploring. There's some good news here on the Power BI side, specifically from Microsoft, in that they have now made the Power BI server a superset of the SSRS server, which means it can handle anything that SSRS can handle, plus all the Power BI stuff. So that'll be our first avenue as we continue to explore things in R4. We'll continue to build that out, but we're also aware that customers have other reporting systems in place similar to Tableau. And the key there is giving you access without causing a security breach. But those problems are solvable. We just need to kind of work through whatever are the logistics of that.
Hey, Randy, another question came in here that asks if exploring Power BI, will you be allowing Power Query and Power Pivot and Excel as well?
So I think the answer there is that what we would allow is that information to be downloaded through the system onto your own system. And then what you do with it should be up to you. Now, there's still a lot of work for us to do here and explore that, but that's how I believe that will operate. So instead of it happening inside our application, it'll essentially be an activity that you're doing down on your desktop. Okay, next slide. All right, so I wanted to highlight this idea of the platform. And Scott's about to go into a discussion here on the configuration. And these two things are, they're loosely coupled is probably the best way to say it, in that the platform is the platform. Without a configuration, it's extremely bare bones. It wouldn't look anything like you would see in R3, right? Because it has very few record types defined. It has very few attributes or fields defined. It has no workflows defined. It has no queries defined or very few queries defined. It is this idea of a configuration being overlaid on the platform that is what's generating Blue Mountain RAM R4, right? It's what's putting together what you will see as the growth of R3. And Scott's going to talk about that. But as we talk about the roadmap and the extensibility of the application, essentially what we're talking about is a completely different configuration, or an adjacent configuration that you would lay on the system that may sit side by side with an initial configuration. And it just creates great power and great extensibility to the application. So keep that in mind. When you're seeing what Scott has presented, it's a specific configuration. And it is what we're doing here in the short term, but it is not the end of R4. And again, we'll talk a little bit about that as we talk about the roadmap. So with that, I think I'm about to turn it over to Scott.
Thank you, Randy. You can go ahead and take it to the next slide, Drexel, please. So first and foremost, what I wanted to kind of talk to a little bit about today is just a brief history of our best practices template. And I promise I'll tie this all together here towards the end, but yeah, we started this out with R3 and we took hundreds of our implementations and we used our internal subject matter experts to really develop this R3 best practices template. During this time, we found out, as Randy mentioned earlier, that a lot of people really embrace the best practices template. So when we decided to launch into the cloud, we leveraged that existing best practices template to launch our R3 Cloud Essentials and best practices implementations or customers, which now we have over 100 users in the cloud. So really, this is kind of dictated how that template is and how feature function rich it is. But one of the areas that we had a hard time with was new areas. And this is a very exciting time for us because we're launching a new product here. So what it enabled us to do was work internally right alongside the development team as this configuration team. So there was a core team put together to really kind of look at the best practices that we did for R3, moving that into the R4 arena. So areas like functional location was not possible in R3. We worked alongside the development team. We're able to put this functional location concept into the R4 best practices. More importantly, there's hundreds of more areas that we've built out. And really what this best practices template is going to do for us is it defines the configuration of the release of Blue Mountain R4. So as Randy talked about the platform and the configuration coming down into Blue Mountain release R4. More importantly, we also believe that this template will meet the needs of our customers that would like to utilize the new features in R4, looking to move off of the existing platforms, off of R3. There's a really rich look and feel that you're going to see tomorrow in each of the presentations around what is in the best practices R4 template. And more importantly, this is going to line us up for what we're calling phase 2 and phase 3 of the product, where we're going to use this template as a starting point to start customizations. So that will enable us to kind of jumpstart that. Some of our customers utilize the best practices template in R3, then went on to completely customize it. You will have that ability to do that in R4 as well. Next slide, Drexel. So I'm going to talk about a couple different areas here, and really building again on what Randy said. This template was redesigned and optimized for the R4 platform. So we started from the ground up, blank slate. As Randy mentioned, if you look at the platform, it's a clean slate. There's nothing there. It has the tools to enable us to build the configuration. So we really started from the ground up, looking at the existing R3 best practices template, looking at the weaknesses that it had, also the strengths that it had. More importantly, what our users were feeding back to us and what the implementation team has learned out in the field to bring that all kind of back to the configuration. So again, keeping in mind automation, compliance, enterprise, performance, and usability. Probably usability from the configuration standpoint was a huge thing that we evaluated. And I'll be talking about that a little bit later here in the presentation. So really, what is the R4 best practices template? It's made up strictly from a standpoint of usability and extensibility. We have a lot better workflow control. We've added over 40 additional workflows, 15 new automations, and we we added groups to support groups within groups. And there'll be a little bit more on that, but for those R3 people who manage groups security within the best practices, we've made your job a whole lot easier moving to R4. Fields and forms, they're specific to your role. So we've defined roles. So you only see what is relevant to your role. It enables us to have multiple forms, so you can see full form, you can see all the data on one form, or just what you need to see on the form. Again, this comes back to usability. We really were focusing in on this. Randy talked a little bit about the automation engine and the notification engine. These are all built engines that we've kind of leveraged through the configuration of the best practices for R4. Next slide, Drexel. So as I mentioned, we added this new automation that's been deployed to the best practices template. We've really leveraged this deep within the configuration. So by doing this, we're able to automatically move states within a workflow with no user input using this automation engine. So therefore, we'll be able to define stuff that we can move right within. For an example, a user submission work will move from the new to pending approval. And when we change the form view, that form view will allow you to see more data collection. So again, around usability. We also are we have features called auto creation of assets on the induction request. So we're automatically doing these. We're auto retiring standards if the expiration is passed today. So if that standard is passed today, we're automatically retiring it. Standards, if work is performed and the standard fails, we'll make it unassignable to other work. So again, we're pulling this usability and trying to make your jobs a lot easier. Due dates, another example, in R3, the creation is like R3, but we can now calculate moving the due date into the review or into the close stage can be based on calculating the due date. So again, some rich functionality here. Groups within groups. I mentioned this earlier, that the existing R3 customers, you have this huge group matrix. You have to go through and put everyone into the group matrix. It became it's a very daunting task. That was one of the areas that came back from the implementation team as well. So now we have groups within groups. So we can now simply take the work coordinators and simply add users into the work coordinators group. So you just have to add them in one. We clearly had to make a lot more groups to make this functional across all areas. But again, you're only moving it into one group, which has been defined in the best practices. So it'll be easier to assign groups. Virtual fields, this is a completely new area for R4. That basically we can take a field whose value is derived from a SQL query, and then these fields are read-only in the application. And then what we can do is we can display that virtual field as it's elevated, or as the field is elevated or calculated in each of the records that is to be viewed. They're all the virtual fields are query enabled and reportable. So you'll be able to report against those. So just an example of what that really means is we've added this function called end of grace period for the application. So this is a read-only virtual field that is included in the planning or the full form views. And what it does is it returns a calculation of work due date plus grace days as an integer value. So you can set this up to say you have this grace, but it's only 4 days after the due date. So it will add the 4 days to that due date and then display that in the grace. Multiple form views. Again, this was really set up for usability. So being able to present only the data that you need on your screen. So that way we streamline data entry. Having the ability to still switch between different forms. If you want to see all the data on all the record, you still can do that. The change request submission across record types, meaning this is now right from the record type, you can create a change request submission. You don't have to go to a query and then create the request from there. Also, the auto creation of assets upon inductions for approval area. Next slide, Drexel.
Hey, Scott, before we move on to the next slide, there are 2 questions here for both you and Randy. So the first question is, will reporting become more vibrant and allow the user to build more complex reports, not relying on Blue Mountain RAM to build those?
So
Randy,
this,
do you want to take that, Randy?
kind of goes back to one of the earlier questions, which is ultimately our customers want to be able to report against their data external to the application. And although that isn't available in the initial phase of the release, it is definitely something that we are looking to expose as we go forward. So when we talk about the roadmap, that's one of the items that's on the roadmap.
If I could just add on to that, as you will see tomorrow, you're going to see a very powerful query engine as well as charting engine that's built within the application that is pretty powerful. You know, it's not going to create a report template as you know the report templates are today, but what we believe is you'll be able to take that data out much more streamlined using pivot tables and other types of applications. But there is some power there in the query and the charting tools.
And thank you. And this question that we have here is, will there be the opportunity to move to review by exception, meaning only work with a failed step in the work plan template would be sent for review, while if it passed, it would go to close?
I believe that is a correct answer. Is Keith or John on the line?
Yeah, I'll step into that. So yes, the ability will be there to do that. So as you'll see with the template, we'll still flow the record with the out-of-the-box template into a review stage, because there's certainly still a role and value for that to review the information that's been entered. But to your point, we do have the ability now with the automation engine, and this will come into play during the customization phase of the launch, to do those very specific types of things. So for example, if the technician did not enter any kind of failure and you wanted it to automatically route to the closed stage as the questions posed, that is now possible in R4.
Thanks, Keith. Just one more question came in here before we go to the next slide. Are all the fields included in queries in R4?
Just about all of them, a lot more. So we certainly recognized in R3 there were some limitations of fields that we could pull in, and even record types that were related that the query engine could get to. So as you'll get to see tomorrow a little bit, and certainly as we dive deeper with you individually, the query engine is tremendously more powerful. And in fact, the entire application is really built upon it. So we can query deeper depths, we can query and pull in virtual fields, as Scott mentioned, and there's graphical displays within the queries themselves to kind of make them visually more in tune with what you're looking at, I guess is the way to describe that. So really some cool stuff to show you tomorrow. We can't wait. Just ask you to be patient here until tomorrow.
So I have to admit, I love Chris's comeback. Oh, we won all fields. So Chris, all the fields that are displayed on the form, you're going to have access to. There's some fields behind the scenes that you may not have access to. But Keith is absolutely right. The richness in the query engine it's dramatically different, and you'll be able to reach far down through many relationships to kind of get to your data. We're quite proud of it and quite happy to show it off in the coming days.
Drexel, do you want to go ahead and go to the next slide, please? So I want to talk just a little bit about workflows here. So we've definitely enhanced the workflows within the application. As I mentioned, there was 40 new workflows that were created. Some of these areas are really around like outsourced activities. So now outsourced activities has their own workflow. So you can assign any of the outsourced activities to its own. Work order planning pre-approval is now its own workflow. This concept of work extension is now its own workflow. We've definitely kept the 1 to 3 levels of approvals for review and work. And those will actually, you'll go through that in the configuration process or the implementation process. Again, I mentioned earlier, you have more options to control your due date when it's recalculated. And in the standards engine, we've added an expiration standard as well as a calibration standard with equipment and without equipment. So those are just some of the enhancements there. On the notification side of the fence, we really tried to streamline this. One of the areas that we kind of got dinged on from all of our 3 customers was the spamming of our notifications to groups. So we really tried to make this field-based notifications only. There are certain group notifications still there. So an example would be on a work record in a review stage. Now if the work is failing, it is just the notification is sent to the completed by person instead of a group of people. So we're trying to really make us a little bit more friendly from that standpoint. Where group notifications are, we're sending higher inbox priorities for like asset schedules coming due and past due, work request older than 24 hours. And as you'll see tomorrow in the presentations, you'll see a lot more of this functionality. And I'm going to go to the next slide, Drexel. As you can see here, there's been a lot of thought and process put into the configuration, and the core team that really worked on the configuration for the last several years are really the people who are going to be presenting tomorrow. But there's a lot of people within the company that has been involved in the configuration. All the analyst group, the project managers, the sales team, development, we've all had a hand in this configuration and really bring this configuration, the power of the configuration back to our customers. So if there's something that that you could take away from you today, is really a couple things here, and it's really on this screen. We've leveraged our years of experience in our implementations to help with the R4 best practices configuration. That's really specific to the R4 capabilities. The base template is a build out to further customization. And then more importantly, as with all our templates, we have a complete validation and design documentation, work instructions, work diagrams, traceability reports. All that comes with the best practices template. So again, what I'd like to do is turn it back over to Randy to kind of talk a little bit about the life cycle.
Slide, Drexel. All right, the roadmap itself. So first of all, Keith is going to cover some details about the roadmap and dates. So I don't want to steal his thunder, but I did want to talk to the roadmap as a broader topic. So what we've seen is that we have a platform and we have a specific configuration as of today. And Scott is absolutely correct in that just about everyone in the company has had some way of participating in what that configuration ended up looking like, or certainly 50 or 60% of our company. And again, it's a reflection of the things that we've heard from you. And we talked about the platform and the product. I didn't really talk much about what you, the user, will be using to access the application. So for R3, we had IE11, and we ultimately in the cloud supported Chrome and maybe on-prem. I'm not sure if we ever got there. But for R4, we knew we wanted to support the underlying engine, the Chromium engine, which is the engine that now runs Chrome, Safari, and Microsoft's new Edge product. It actually is the underlying engine for more browsers than that, but those are the three that we're supporting out the door. And we talked about responsive design, and therefore, regardless of whether you're on a smartphone or a tablet or your laptop or your desktop, you'll be able to access the application. But there's another piece to that, right? Which is this idea of apps themselves, mobile apps, those things that are resident perhaps on a smartphone and can interact with the hardware that's on there. So that's certainly in our future. We're going to be developing these very specific apps over time. You can think of things like a request app, or a way to kind of go through and deal with cycle counts or items like that. We are starting to prioritize that list, and it'll be something that we'll continue to work on after the initial phases of the release. And Keith will talk about the phases of the release as time goes on. And somebody's pointing out to me that Safari is WebKit, not Chromium. So thank you, Bill. But more importantly, this idea of platforms and configuration. So this configuration of the system, which is the initial release here of R4, one of the things that we're looking to attack are some adjacent markets, right? And we're going after these markets for two reasons. One is you've told us that, we're really a great application and we provide great value to you, and that for the amount of money that you're spending on us, you're able to get significant value out of it in terms of what you're doing day to day, and that you have these other needs for other systems. And so when we think about that, it just allows us in the future to approach some of these other things, which may include things like environmental health and safety, or MES systems, or quality management. And we haven't defined any of those yet, but they're definitely on our horizon. And again, we think, it's built on the same platform, which means that same OQ will apply regardless of the configuration that's overlaid on it. Now, you'd still need to do a PQ, but you're getting that bang for the installation qualification and the OQ with that R4 platform. And then this idea of adding additional functionality is really nothing more than completing the configuration and then walking through a PQ piece with it. So good there. So I see another question that's asking about logbooks. And I'm not sure, Keith, if that's part of any of the presentations tomorrow, but let me just say this about logbooks. We rewrote the whole logbooks area, in that it used to be this thing that would sit down underneath an asset. It's now a true record type on its own. And ultimately, you can have many different kinds of logbooks if you so choose. So we listened, and we're allowing you ultimately to define more. The base configuration, or the configuration that we have going out the door here as a lockdown implementation, only has a single logbook in it, but we recognize that you're going to want to have more. So the answer is yes, you'll be able to do that. Okay, that was all I had on the roadmap.
Another question here, Randy, is how many years will you still support R3?
We haven't defined that yet, but again, we know that we're going to need to support R3 into the future. And I promise you, when it goes, we'll give you plenty of notice. I mean, it's not like we're going to introduce this and end it in 6 months or something like that. We recognize that we've gone through a retirement here with the Cowman 4 platform. We gave our customers plenty of notice in advance of when that retirement is. We haven't defined that date yet.
So Drexel, if you want to go to the next slide. So tomorrow, you are in for a good show tomorrow. And like I said, the core base configuration team will be presenting tomorrow. So Janice, Keith, Nick, John, and Nate will be going through. These are the times for each of the presentations. And I think you're going to get a lot out of these sessions and really around the best practices template. I'm actually going to put Savannah on the spot too, as you're going through these demonstrations, please email me and I'll have her chat my email address into the window there about things you like, things that you don't like. As always, we like feedback, and this could be a direct way for you to provide that feedback to the team. And I can turn it back over to Drexel.
Okay, thank you, Scott and Randy. Just as a reminder, if you had questions, feel free at this point if you want to unmute yourself and certainly ask the question out, or you can use the chat window and just if you could send it to everybody, that would be ideal. Just so make sure one of us here sees the chat and can get a response to you. So we'll just leave a couple of minutes here to allow people to type if they're typing. I don't want to cut it off too early before we switch over into our next presentation.
Also, I'll just follow up on Scott's note. I did just post his email in the chat window in case anyone wants to send any feedback. So that can be found in the chat window.
That's great. Thank you, Savannah. Okay, well, I'll continue to monitor it as questions come in. Feel free if you have a question, we can certainly jump back and get Scott and Randy to answer it. And I know they're going to be on all day and able to take those questions. So a couple come in here so far. So it said, the first one is you mentioned that due dates will be able to be more customizable. Can you please elaborate more, or is that going to be covered later in the presentation?
I'll take that question. So the answer is yes, we are going to touch on that tomorrow. So I just ask you to be patient and we'll show you kind of what exactly Scott was referring to in the application there.
Okay, great, thank you. The next question here says, I remember at some point you were talking about a barcode system. Is this something that we'll look to for part of R4, mainly for inventory?
So I can jump in there. So, we did a demonstration, I believe, at previous summit where essentially the barcode reader acts as a wedge, but we do react to those those scans as a wedge now. Now, when we get further along and we're developing very specific apps, we'll be able to do even more with it. But even today, you can use the barcodes themselves to scan perhaps a list of parts you want to add to a work item or a number of things like that, or just to bring up an asset or its work history, just by if it's on, like your CAL label or something like that. It would require a wedge today to be able to do that, but it would work.
Thank you. And some of those questions are great, and we're hoping at the end of tomorrow's live sessions in our R4 breakout to be able to really dive into some of those. In some cases, show you what we can in the application to do that. So we want that to be part of it. A couple of additional questions that have come in here. Are there any customizations with due dates and grace periods applied to due dates. And then there's a second part to that I'll say.
Yeah, that again, that's to the previous question. That's definitely something we'll cover tomorrow and show you kind of how that works. There's this concept of a grace period with the schedule. So for example, if you have something that's done annually and it's 30 days past due, well, that's okay typically. Whereas if it were done quarterly, you wouldn't want it to be 30 days past due. So there's this concept of a grace period, which is an add-on to the actual due date. And we implemented that via using a virtual field in R4. So you'll see a new field on a work record called end of grace period date. May have the exact wording off, but really what it is, all that it is taking the due date plus the grace period that you assign to the schedule, be it 7 days, 3 days, 0 days. If you don't use a concept of a grace period, you would just leave that as 0. And that's built into the template, and it's built into the platform to allow us to implement it in the template is probably the correct way to say that.
Yeah, thanks, Keith. Another question here before we switch over to our next presentation. It was, well, I guess two. Any dedicated field for the asset manual to allow us to attach the service operation manuals to the asset record?
Yes, there is an attachments grid really on virtually every record type now, where you can attach any type of a document to that, really, whether it be an image or a PDF, Word document, you name it.
And then maybe, Keith, you could talk to the last two questions here are really about some specific functionality, but maybe you could talk to if they'll be covered in the sessions tomorrow. One is asking about providing custom notifications, and then the other is asking about the hierarchy function, if it can be automated, and some, automated generation of PAL work. So any of those things, and maybe you could talk to what will be covered tomorrow a little bit.
Yeah, so the notifications, you're going to see a new, what we call a notification hub inside the interface, kind of similar to the alerts that you might see on your phone. We did in the template really strive to reduce the number of notifications so they don't become spam, because eventually people tune them out if there's too many of them. So we really focused on, the baseline team, I should say, focused on defining notifications out of the box that are based on exceptions that may occur, such as an out of tolerance for calibration, or let's say something was being reviewed and it's pushed back to the person that completed it, they'd get a notification, as opposed to, well, it was just done, or just kind of a day-to-day normal interaction, which again becomes just too much, really. Now, that being said, there's much more customization capabilities available in R4. So if there is a custom notification that you want that may not be in the baseline template, there's a good chance that we can make it happen through configuration with R4. And that's a big difference from R3, whereas it's we have the platform that development has built, which allows us, with a configuration overlaid, that allows us to do a lot of things without having to go back and have them actually build or modify a feature to make certain things happen. Not that some of that won't be required, but a lot less than in R4 would be required in many cases. Sorry, there's a ton of questions, Drexel, so you'll have to help me with where we're at here.
No, I think I want to be respectful of time and those of us that are joining for a specific presentation. So, if we go over a little, I don't, it's not a problem. If we're short, we'll certainly take some breaks in here. But I think some of the remaining questions, it would be best to get through maybe via chat, since they're specific functionality questions. And certainly then, tomorrow we will have much deeper dives into R4. This presentation this morning was meant to help kind of kick off R4 as being a really pivotal part of the summit, and we're really excited to go into the presentations tomorrow as Scott talked about, it's really the second half of the day tomorrow, ending with a breakout, just a free-form breakout session where you'll be able to ask really specific functionality questions. So I think we'll take those through chat for now, and definitely there'll be lots of opportunities tomorrow to ask those questions.